Hello and welcome to the Gratitude and Growth Podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Mittich. I am an actor, a yoga instructor, a former ballet dancer, but above all, I am a wildly curious person. So I've spent the past several years researching and studying human behavior, why we do what we do, who and what we innately are, what my purpose is on this planet. And I'm here to share the insights and the tools that curiosity has led me to uncover, in hopes of helping you to navigate the inevitable ups and downs of your own life, and in hopes of inspiring you to become the person that you have always wanted to be. So pull up a chair or go for a walk, hop on that treadmill or go for a drive, and join me as I explore what it is to be a human being in this lifetime. Hello, and welcome back to another episode. I have a repeat guest with me today because we had such a great time doing this the first time. We thought we would do it again. He is a friendly reminder. He is a motivational speaker now for over 30 years. He is an author. He is a Silver Lining Prospector, and he is also a gratitude junkie like me. Please welcome back the wonderful Ian Tyson.
Well, hello, Sarah. Thanks so much for having me back. I appreciate being a repeat guest.
Yes, my first one. I love it. I'm so grateful and I'm so excited. And to give everybody a little backstory, after our last session, Ian and I continued to talk for a bit after we stopped rolling. And we came up with this idea to have another episode specifically talking about grief and navigating death and navigating loss. We've both experienced death and loss in our lives and have come to terms with using some tools that helped both of us navigate these very intense emotions and these very intense moments in our lives. And so I thought it was a really great opportunity to sit and just talk about this because it's not always talked about. And I think it's one of the hardest things to navigate in life, whether it's unexpected or expected. So we're just going to have a very open and honest and authentic and vulnerable conversation about death in our own lives and how we've come to terms with it in a way that fills our lives with gratitude and appreciation and love. So it's going to be a bit of a free-for-all today, and that's kind of how I want the episode to go.
I'm there for it.
Awesome. So I think the best way to start is, why don't we each talk about maybe the death that we've experienced in our
Sure.
lives, because they're different, and then kind of let it go from there. So Ian, do you mind starting?
Not at all. I don't mind. That's fine. Yeah, I mean, for me, and I think we were last time we were together, I certainly mentioned and alluded to it as kind of my inciting incident, sort of the origin story, if you will, pardoning the parlance. But yeah, mom passed when I was 10. She'd been sick for a good 5, 7 years before that. I mean, it was the 70s. They thought she had MS for a long time. And because it's symptomatically, it seemed similar because she would get occasional slurred speech. She had lost use of her dominant hand, her right hand, lost use of her left leg, was using a walker, usually a wheelchair. And they eventually, and this is the crazy part with medical technology being where it's at now in 2024, in 1977, my mom and my dad we were all shipped off to neighbors' houses for a couple of weeks. And they went to Montreal to get a CAT scan because that was the only place in Eastern Canada you could get one, which is wild to think about now. But they went there and they went, well, there's the problem. And it was a brain tumor. And so they had to do a surgery there. And she was gone for several months, which I don't have a lot of memory of. And then came back and didn't walk again. And then, yeah, they thought they had got it all. And then in April of 1981, I guess it would have been later in March, she had a bit of an incident and didn't feel well. They took her into the hospital, ended up in the ICU, and she passed on April 26th of 81. So I was 10 years old, soon to be 11. And so, single parent family, for a good chunk before that, like I don't really have memory of mom at home, being honest. I've seen photos. I maybe have the occasional flash, but mostly it was visiting her in hospitals, long-term care facilities, or at my grandparents' house, who lived about 10 minutes away because their house was all one floor, unlike ours. Everything was there and it had wider hallways. And they had one of those adorable 1970s intercom systems in the house. So they could leave that active, and if she needed anything through the night, and they got a hospital bed. So on the weekends, we would often go and stay at my grandparents' house and see mom there.
Okay, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So, do you mind if I just dive in and ask some
Oh, please.
questions?
No, go ahead. Yeah,
Okay,
absolutely.
so one of my first questions was, do you have a lot of recollection of, that time and when she passed? Can you do you remember what that was like for you?
I remember moments. I mean, I remember the last time I saw her at the hospital because she was in the ICU just before. So I remember the very last visit. And I remember saying goodbye and they'll see you in a couple of days. And maybe it's mythologizing, maybe it's something I've made up in my head for my own comfort. I'm not sure. But I have a very crystal clear memory because I can obviously very clearly remember her face. But I remember this sort of knowing smile and
Mhm.
going, okay, because she was in the ICU. She was a nurse. She knew what was going on. And I'm pretty sure she was well aware of what was going to happen. And there was just this, okay, Ian, okay, kind of smile when I said, I'll see you soon. Um, she knew she probably wouldn't. And I remember that. I remember the day she passed because I was out with a friend all day, like playing with another kid, neighborhood kid, going to his grandparents' house and doing all kinds of things, and then coming home to an empty house except for a family friend, which was odd. And he walked me down the street and sort of asked how I was. He also had previously been our minister at the church we went to when I was a kid. And it was just odd that he was there and then walked me down to the end of the street, and our family doctor lived at the end of our street. We were on a little cul-de-sac crescent. And I specifically remember walking around the sort of corner of the hedges and seeing my dad sitting on their front steps with my brother and sister sitting on his lap crying. And I sort of looked up at Ike, this family friend, and he just put his hand on my shoulder. And it was weird the way he said it. He said, "This afternoon, your mom's heart stopped beating." And then
Mm.
I don't remember much after that. Um, for a while, there are little moments. I remember the visitation. I remember parts of the funeral. I remember a lot of casseroles showing up at the house because that's what the neighborhood did. It was 1981, and here was this poor single father who'd been doing it like that for a good 5-7 years anyway. But a lot of casseroles showing up at the house, and yeah, just moments really after that, being off school for probably a good couple of weeks, but. Just I don't have a lot of like I could tell you exactly what that day was like. I just have little moments that I remember.
And how would you say it affected you in your teen years, in your early adulthood? Did you ever have a time where you came to the real, not real, but came to a more aware understanding of that as you got older?
Oh, for sure. I have very clear memories of that. And it was very indicative of, those the teen years, and all the emotions and hormones and everything else are swirling around inside you like a blender all at once. And I think I was in ninth grade. Hadn't really properly dealt with it, I don't think. Because my dad, in the intervening years, my mom had been very clear. She's like, hey, the kids need a mother. And he remarried quickly. Um, fair, like within a year and a bit, he was married again. Because he was under strict instructions. I mean, honestly, she had said like the kids need a mother, and yeah, didn't make a great choice. They divorced just before, like, or right at the beginning of my grade 9 year, and I think it was one of those first high school girlfriends, and then I'd been broken up with, and all the emotions pour out, and then everything poured out sort of all at once. And I remember it was after that I can remember the night specifically, actually, but a lot of this poured out. I was at an event. I think I'd been doing sort of some work for a political campaign. I got real active in that stuff when I was younger. And a guy who I had maybe just met throughout the course of the campaign, who was a couple of years older than me, friendly enough, funny. We shared a sense of humor and everything else. There was an election night party in one of, as candidates are wont to do, having sort of something in an abandoned storefront or whatever it was. And we were having the party, and the girl that had broken up with me was there. And I got real emotional. I was always an emotional kid. And so now I'm 14, real emotional. I went and found a room where nobody was and just started to cry. Just everything was pouring out of me. And this guy, Chris, who again, I didn't know that well, had noticed my absence at the event and came looking for me and sort of opened the door, saw this person that he hardly knew crying on the floor, like sort of crunched up in the corner. And I don't know what it was, but it's probably the reason that he and I are still friends today. He, without saying a word, walked over, sat right down beside me, and put his arm around me. And I just kind of leaned into him, and just everything came out. And I don't remember this, but he's told me, like, I started calling for mom.
Mm,
Like, I was just gutted. And then it was probably not long after that, he was the person who took me to her grave for the first time.
wow.
So a lot of dealing with things happened 4 years later, for sure.
And I mean, that's still so young to
Yeah.
have to process those emotions. I mean, did you did you get help when you were younger at all, like professional help?
We did some family therapy after dad remarried because it was also blending two families together. So there was some, combativeness sometimes with between the kids and, just all of this new stuff. So we did a little bit of family therapy then, but we didn't do much. I mean, it wasn't as prevalent as it is now for, well, let's get these kids in therapy. And I didn't do extensive proper therapy until after my divorce when I was 40. And man, the layers of the onion we peeled back then, and some stuff I had come to realize that it maybe through my grief, but because of that loss, that had really informed my attachment style as an adult, and why certain things had happened in relationships that I had. And really, over a decade of therapy, peeled a lot of stuff back and really helped me be the better version of myself. But I didn't deal with some of that stuff until much later, and really didn't have a realization of the depth of the impact that that loss had until I was much older.
Okay, so this is so wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing all that. Having done the amount of work that you have on yourself at this point in your life,
Yep.
the incitement of, you can see how certain attachment styles manifested because of this. Is there anything you can share in what you've learned in the awareness now that, it's an interesting thing to say that you wish you would have known in your teens, in your 20s,
Sure.
but if there is anyone who's listening to this right now who just lost their parent and they're maybe in their teens, I'm not entirely sure of the demographic of this podcast, but who knows? Technology is so accessible everywhere. But if they're in their teens or, you know, early 20s, 30s, whatever it is, but can you share some more insights that maybe you wish you had learned or done, things you would have done back then?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I think that no matter, we never stop developing. I mean, yes, our brains kind of finish cooking at around 25. And as I read in a great post, said, I wish our brains had just internally, only you could hear it, a little ding, like when an oven's up to heat, that would just go bing when your brain stops cooking. So you can really, I think I can trust my decisions now. My frontal cortex has finished cooking. That would be great if we could, but there's no such thing. But I think we're always developing, and there's always different things, especially in, familial relationships, that are going to affect you no matter what age that you're at. But for me, and this is, again, the stuff uncovered in therapy, it was the notion of my therapist saying, and I mean, I understood the way she was meaning it, but she said, your mom left, not intentionally, but she left at an age when you were making certain attachments and starting to build things in your mind in terms of what female relationships looked like. And so she left, and you never wanted anybody to leave again. And you were going to do whatever you needed to do and let them do whatever they needed to do so that nobody ever left again. And that's why, sometimes I made some poor relationship choices in my teens, in my 20s, in my 40s. I mean, it's or in just even not that they were necessarily poor choices, but poor behaviors and the way that I dealt with things and the things that were thrown. Like I just always wanted everything to be okay, almost to an obsessive level, and that could become a problem. And so obviously there's different developments and different types of relationships. I mean, I have friends who have similarly lost a parent, but at much different ages. And people who have been, if there's been an extended illness and they're able to say goodbye, that certainly has an impact on the grief and on things later on because things weren't left unsaid. But there was definitely a lot to unpack there, and not only in romantic relationships, but in just the way I was with people. So much stuff that came out of therapy because of that core grief, that traumatic incident that really shaped who I was, and I wouldn't change anything about who I was or the decisions I've made. I think that maybe some of the decisions would have been better, or some of my reactions or responses would have been better had I known, had I had those tools, which is why I think it's so important for everybody to have access to mental health care whenever they need it. But yeah, we didn't, to answer the earlier question, that was a long way of saying we really didn't get the proper therapy. I didn't get it until much later. We did a little family therapy, but there was definitely more stuff going on that I probably could have dealt with. And I don't blame my dad. It was a different time.
Yeah. And so when you were working through all this in therapy and you got to that root of grief,
Yeah.
that like pang, and processing that as an adult, were there any exercises that really stood out to help with that healing? Because it is healing, right? Like
Oh,
that is what
sure.
we're doing. And I want to definitely want to talk about this down the road of how like those waves, at least for me, the waves still come. Like the
Oh,
waves
yeah.
will always come. Um, and I think acceptance is a really big part of that. And I'll get to that. But specifically, you and I, we talk about gratitude a lot.
Yes.
And for me, gratitude is one of the foundational blocks for me in navigating and accepting death and grief and loss. And it took me a very long time to do that for my dad, and I'll get to that, but I'm just for yourself, did you find gratitude helps you through navigate that grief, or did that come later? Where did gratitude come in your journey of it?
Well, let's put it this way. I mean, I have always, and you'll forgive the way that the sentence is structured here, but I've always chosen to pull the positivity out of what happened. Obviously, would love it if mom was still here, could meet her grandchildren and great grandchildren and all these different things, that and family members to come and see how my brother and my sister and I have grown and flourished and all the things that we've done and all of that. But I wouldn't be the same person if it hadn't have happened. I mean, I
Mhm.
wouldn't be the person sitting in front of you right now, looking at you on a screen, having this conversation. I don't know that I would have the same mindset. Like, sure, there's always that wish that things could have been different, but I've always tried to pull the gratitude from it. I mean, when I think about it sometimes, like you said, 30 plus years now being a motivational speaker, there's always been some degree of talking about mom and that story in there because again it's sort of my origin story, it's my inciting incident. But the fact that I started doing the speaking when I was 18 and was clearly not fully healed at that point, I used sometimes what I was doing on stage and trying to talk about like this happened but here's the positives I gained from it, that was also part of my healing, was vocalizing things in that way. And so for 30 plus years, I've been able to get up and tell my story, share that grief, but show that there's another side that can be filled with gratitude in spite of those things happening. I think that that's been one of the things that's definitely helped me heal and helped me find the gratitude. I mean, and the context which I talk about it has obviously changed over the years, but it always sort of was, and my closing story always used to be that mom was the kind of person that just always wanted to make sure everybody was having a good day and make people smile and make them laugh. And they remembered that because one of my clear memories is the huge crowd at her funeral when, family, my brother and sister and I all put a flower on the casket and walked away from the grave. And it was my life flashing before my eyes. And teachers she'd met once, and nurses from hospitals she'd been at for a week, and all these people that passed briefly in and out of her life. But because she was that kind of person, that's why they came to say thank you and that she had made a difference. Sharing that and drawing my inspiration from that, that's what got me through, quite frankly. Like, there is good here, there is strength here, there is strength in that memory, there is strength in that grieving, there is strength in the good that we can take from the memory and honoring that person. That's the part that has healed me, and that's where I found that gratitude in those silver linings.
Yeah, I think finding the gratitude for me, we talked about this a little bit in our previous episode too, but especially when it comes to death, I will sit there and I will write everything I'm grateful for that either their life or their death has taught me. Um, Grateful for whether it happened quickly or slowly, finding gratitude in how the death happened. Because I think the gratitude for me is able to let me find the acceptance of what happened. And so I'm going to dive in quickly and say my story with it
Please,
because there's still
yes.
more I want to chat with you. So I've talked about this a few times on the podcast, but for those of you who haven't listened to it yet, or if this is your first episode, first, welcome. So when I was 23, I lost my dad. On June 1st, he was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer, and August 17th, he was gone. And he had been looking a little ill. My dad was always a big guy. He was like, I don't know, 6'6", 6'8", like huge, was a basketball player in Serbia, thick Serbian accent, big mustache, hair in a ponytail, because since he saw Zorro with Anthony Hopkins, he was like, I want to look like Zorro. And so biggest laugh, like bolsterous, biggest personality. And so, my sister and I especially had noticed that he was like losing some weight for a couple months, but he was like, I'm losing all the weight that I had gained. And then finally, he was like, okay, I need to go for a colonoscopy. And his original colonoscopy was booked for September, but they had a cancellation. And so I took him to the colonoscopy and I dropped him off. And I remember going to Subway and I was reading probably like a Nora Roberts novel back then.
Sure. Yep.
And then I went back to go pick him up. And the doctor called me in. And my dad's still kind of sedated. And I'll never forget this. And he's laying there and his eyes are kind of, you know, doing what they do. And the doctor hands me these stacks of papers. And on them are pictures of all these tumors in my dad's colon. And he was like, there's two 10-centimeter tumors in his colon. We've done a biopsy. We can't say that it's cancer, but it's most likely cancer. And it looks like stage 4. And I was sitting there and I was like, whoa. It's like, okay, cool. But not. I was completely numb and silent. And I remember talking to the doctor, but it's funny. I'm even having the feeling now, talking about the details of like my teeth start to go numb and like my
Mhm.
saliva starts to get like, you know, and the doctor left and walked away. And I looked at my dad and he was still a little sedated. And he just looked at me and he was like, I guess maybe it's my time. And it just hit me. And I was like, I'm going to go get the car. And so I walked to get the car. And the first thing I do is I call my one sister. And I just remember shaking, being like, hi, dad has two tumors. And I remember I was in Hamilton, busy intersection. I'm on the phone and I'm not paying attention. And I go to cross the street, but it's a red light for me and like cars are honking at me. It was very movie dramatic. But
Sure.
it's so crazy how in these moments of trauma, like I remember all these details. Sometimes I can't even remember like what I did last week, or my memory comes in and out, but these moments are imprinted. And I'm so grateful that they are. I truly am, because I think it's us talking about these stories. Like, this is one reason I know this happened to me, is for me to be able to share this with the world and empower people to find the tools and to find healing in it. Anyway, talk to my sister, pick up my dad, take him back to his apartment, and then it's kind of a whirlwind. My parents divorced when I was 9. I was living with my mom in Toronto. My dad was living in Hamilton, which is about an hour away. And my mom's like a champ and a half. I'm taking care of my dad. I start spending a lot of my time there. I quit my jobs, my side jobs. I tell my agent I can't audition anymore. And I'm taking him to meetings. First learning what this is, going for the MRI, talking to a dietitian because colon cancer has a very certain diet that you should be eating. And it happens very fast. It happens very fast. I literally did everything. I did some things that I don't even know if I can say publicly because the legalities behind them, but like I literally did everything to try to save him. And I remember this one time I dropped him off for radiation and they wheeled him in. And I was very good with like composing myself. I would cry when I needed to, but I was like, Sarah, get your shit together.
Right.
Because if you break, he's going to break. So it's like, get your shit together and be okay. And I remember they wheeled him away and I sat there and I finally just broke because I was like, I don't know what to do anymore. And I don't know how to fix this. Like, I don't know how to fix this. And there was a counselor there in the cafeteria and she came and sat with me, which was such a gift. And she started talking to me. And I found some healing in that conversation. And then it was back and forth. And then it just kept getting progressively worse. And we had to have the conversation, my dad and I, because I'm not a nurse. And I
Mm.
was staying with him. And, it got to the point where he couldn't go to the bathroom on his own. And he's a 6'6", still tall man, like losing weight, but still huge. And I don't have these skills or these
Right.
capabilities. And so we talked about it and we actually got in a terrible argument, which I'll save that for another day. But because he didn't want to go to the hospital, he didn't want to go
Mm.
to the hospital. And I was like, but I can't keep doing this. So I ended up winning and I called an ambulance and they took him to the hospital. Then he was there. Then they released him. We got him back home a few weeks later. Then my sister found an incredible hospice in Guelph and we took him there and we were staying with him there. Like, I remember the Olympics were on and the hospice was so great. They had a pull-out couch. So I'd sleep there. We'd bring our dogs there. And I remember the one night I was like, I just need my own bed. I need to go home. And so I went and I woke up at 7 a.m. to the hospice calling me.
Mm.
I was like, no. And the nurse was great. She was like, he's awake, he's cohesive. He's just asking for you and Yatsa. And I was like, that's my mom. And my other sister lived in Guelph, so she was there. And I was like, we're coming. So my mom, my sister, and I drove. Or sorry, my mom and I drove. My sister was there. And we get there and he's cohesive. But now I can look back, I'm like, oh, he knew. He totally knew, you know?
Yeah.
And that day was the most beautiful representation of pure humanity that I've ever experienced. And he was talking to us. We each got a moment with him. And then there was this beautiful moment where my sister and I kind of pulled back and we were watching him and my mom. And they had been divorced at this point for, I don't know, 14, 15 years. And he just opened his eyes because he would kind of fall asleep, opened his eyes, and he just like reached for her and called her by her nickname. And it was this beautiful moment of peace between the two of them. Um, And then my mom, my sister, and my mom went to Bulk Barn and got us like all the jelly beans and the candy that we could have. And the three of us sat there and we went through every single emotion. I think we would talk about his life and start laughing. Then we would start crying. Then we would get angry. Then it was so human. Then, like, the wildest moments of comedy. And then at one point, I turned around and I looked at him, and the whites of his eyes were going black. And I started to have a panic attack. I was like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And my mom, being the rock that she is, was like, okay. I don't know how she knew how to do all this, but my sister, my mom, and I, we each kind of like grabbed a hand and we were there and we literally watched his body die,
Mm,
watched him take his last breath. And, but I think that there was such a beauty in that and deep, deep gratitude I found for that because I found it very poetic that he was here when I came into the world and I was holding his hand as he left this world.
absolutely.
Right? And the the deep gratitude I found in this that I talk about a lot with people is for me, it's so beautiful that there were no questions. And then the week after that was hell. It was actually hell. Planning a funeral, doing all this, everything that I don't even remember a lot of that week. And actually, a lot of those memories just came back a couple months ago because my mom lost both her parents within 3 days of each other.
Oof.
Yeah. And anyway, I remember I finally really broke watching the casket lower into the ground at my dad's funeral. And finally it all hit me. And then I think I slept for like a week. But after that, I processed it, but I didn't. I didn't.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, cool. A month later, I'm like, great. Okay, agent, I'm ready. Let's go back. And I talked about it, but I didn't. I didn't get help. I also didn't tell anyone he was sick while he was sick. None of my friends knew. My
Right.
partner at the time, he knew, but I asked him not to tell any of his friends because whenever I was with them, I needed normal. Like I needed some semblance of normal to kind of regulate and even out just dealing with everything with my dad. And so I just went back to it and I talked about it every now and then, but not a lot. And then I went on with life. And eventually I was like, okay, cool, I'm fine. I'm healed. It's great. I cry every now and then, but like whatever. And then cue my summer of sadness, which everybody, that's episode 1 of the podcast. I highly recommend you listen to it. And
As do I. It's a good
yeah,
listen.
yeah. And then so cue my summer of sadness. I make this big life change. And this is 9 years after my dad died. And I do mushrooms one night and my entire world opens up from under me and dead dad, thorn, demon comes out and starts talking to me. And summer of sadness, though, I started going to therapy. And similarly to you, I highly recommend professional help of some sort. Therapy is a great avenue. It's not the only avenue. It really
No.
isn't. I say to everybody, I'm like, whatever you're called to, but there is such value in speaking with somebody who has an objective view of your life to a point that cares for you, but isn't a family member, isn't a friend, does not have an opinion on how you're living your life, just provides you with tools and has the know-how how to do that because I love my family and friends, and bless them, but they don't have the tools. They didn't have the tools. So I finally start unearthing all of this. And after my shrooms trip, a bunch of stuff came out. And for me, the biggest thing I had to deal with and heal was guilt. I had such an immense guilt, and I didn't realize this until I was in therapy one day. And a couple days before that, this was in like thick of depression after my mushrooms trip. Like I was in such depression for like 3 weeks and I couldn't talk about it with anybody because I realized I'm like, I couldn't save him. Like that was the
Mm,
dialogue that started coming up. I'm like, I couldn't save him. I couldn't save him. And similarly to you, I learned, I'm like, oh, this is why for those 9 years, every relationship in my life, I was always operating from a place of, I need to save you. I need to save you. I need to make sure you're okay. And I would put everybody else above myself. And not only that, I would pull myself in a million different directions to, it was even above people pleasing. It was literally, this dialogue was, I can save you. And that too
Yeah.
got me into relationships that did not serve me. And I was not approaching them always from the healthiest mindset, because
No.
I was like, I can fix things. I can fix you. As weird as it is to say, but that's what I was operating from. And it all stemmed back to this, to
Sure.
these 3 months, to this traumatic incident in my life. And so for me, it was accepting a lot of that guilt and analyzing it. And, you know, especially in my situation where it's like, I'm going to all the appointments. And look, I understand I can't cure cancer, but I will be honest and tell you, in that moment, I was like, but I can. I
Of
can,
course.
and I can, and I can, and I will. And then when I didn't, it was like, whoa. And so guilt was a big thing I had to work on. And the way I got through that guilt was first and foremost acceptance that it wasn't up to me. It wasn't my fault. Acceptance that I did do everything I could. But this for me truly is where the gratitude started to come in, because it was gratitude that actually relieved me of guilt.
Mm.
Because literally I would sit there day after day and write pages of, with all my heart, I am so truly grateful that I did the best I could. With all my heart, I am so truly grateful that when he asked me to stop the appointments, I stopped. It was with gratitude for those moments. It took a long time, and I got to be honest when I say that. Sometimes with gratitude, now it's my lifeline. Now I operate from it so effortlessly and so authentically. But at first, it kind of feels fake. It feels like an exercise. But then eventually, that rewiring, right? That reprogramming. Emotions are such a tricky thing. And this is why even I get hesitant sometimes to talk about grief, because there's so many different ways of healing and certain things that naturally resonate with people. But even though your emotions are true, your emotions are not you.
No, and they are things that come in waves, and we have, so many thousands of thoughts a day. They can't all possibly be true. Some of them are our internal dialogue, and so yeah, that stuff's going to come. But I think, like with what you're saying, and I'm certainly not going to try and put words in your mouth or anything. I'll just speak for myself. But where the gratitude comes and where I think it's so important that we have conversations like this is everybody's going to have grief of some kind in their life. I mean, if you don't, you're deeply fortunate, and I don't know what exactly has happened with you, but you're like that's craziness. But everybody's going to have some type of grief, and I think the thing about grief is that oftentimes when you're going through it, you feel as though nobody has gone through something as horrible as what you're going through in that moment. And so when we have those conversations about it and show the gratitude that can be on the other side of it, that shows people the pathway out. I mean, I know for me in my work, I hold off, and I mean, some of it is intentional, but it's just also the flow of the narrative. But I don't really talk about anything with mom or bring that up until later when I'm doing a
Mm.
presentation for a school or a conference or whatever. And I'm talking about things like gratitude, or I'm talking about things like intention and attitude and finding your silver lining. And I love a little bit that I can see the looks on people's faces in the audiences I talk to that go, yeah, whatever, dude, you don't know. And then when I get vulnerable and try to share my personal side and talk about that grief and talk about that incident and talk about coming at the other side, they're like, oh shit, yeah, you do know. Okay. And then that's the healing part. That's what's so great about having these open conversations and you getting to this place with yours. And I hope I didn't cut you off there before the end of what you were saying, but
Not at all.
I just, I think that's the beauty of these things is one, showing people they're not alone. They're not the only person that's ever gone through something like this. Them feeling that we all do creates, even in some way, a sense of community, which is something to be grateful for, and that there's other people out there. And And I think that showing them that there's another side, that like whatever this deep, dark hole you may be in, which grief often is, as you and I both know, going, well, yeah, this person went through the same thing. They also went through this same type of grief, but look, they found the other side of it. That's the most inspiring thing in the world. And I mean, that's one of the reasons I do what I do for a living, and why having these conversations like this are so important.
Yeah. And I think it's also just to inspire people who might be in that dark hole that there is that light and there is that gratitude. Sometimes it takes a lot of work on yourself to get there.
Yeah.
And that is one thing I'm so grateful for grief, and honestly for death.
Mm.
Death, the biggest thing I'm grateful for about death is it's always a reminder to me of life. It's a reminder to me that everything is temporary, that everything is impermanent. And it reminds me to A, live my life, and B, it allows me to reflect on how I am living my life. And am I living my life how I want to? It might
Yes.
sound very dramatic, but I do this a lot where I'm like, if I die tomorrow, where am I at today?
Mm.
It's an exercise I do quite often because it reminds me to live today.
Yeah.
And because sometimes people do ask me, they're like, but how can you find gratitude in grief? Like, what are things to be grateful for? And we've talked about so many of them already today, but I mean, there is always something to be grateful for. It might just be a perspective change for you. It might be
Yeah.
something you've never thought of before. But as we've discussed, it's like not all your thoughts are true. And more than that, your thoughts are your choice.
Yes.
And the thing with grief or fear or depression or anxiety is, I think the first and important thing you can do is you have to accept the emotion.
Yeah.
You just do. I feel like sometimes there's two avenues here with everybody I've spoken to and in my own journey. It's either you suppress the emotion and you're like, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine. And you don't allow it to come through and to pass through because, hey, it's uncomfortable. It sucks. Absolutely. But here's the thing, the longer you bottle it up, number one, it's always going to come out. It's going to come out
Oh, yeah. There's no
at some
hiding
point in
that.
your life. Yeah. Um, and B, the longer you bottle it up, the more intense the release will be. Versus, for example, now when I get hit with waves of grief, when I miss my dad, when things hit me, I just sit there. I literally focus on my breathing. I let the grief hit me fully. Honestly, I cry for like, I don't know, 5 to 10 minutes. And then I'm like, okay, cool. That wave passed. I'm going to move on with my day. It's when we fight the emotion that we start building this like armor around it. And that, at least for me, is when all these personality traits I start building that don't necessarily serve me.
Right. Well, and it's interesting you mentioned bottle, that you just tweaked something in my mind that I wanted to show you. Well, I'm going to show you and I will describe it because we're obviously on an audio medium, but my partner sent me this picture. It was something she'd seen online, and it was so perfect. She, I don't think, had any idea that we were going to be doing a podcast talking about grief today. But it was this, and I don't know if you can see this, but it has, have you seen this one before? It has,
No.
so it's got, to describe for people what's going on, the top row has three mason jars, let's just call them three jars, with three different sized black balls, a large one, a medium sized one, and a very small one inside. And then the second row has three exact same sized black balls with three different sized jars, a small, a medium, and a large. Under the first line, it says, people tend to believe that grief shrinks over time. What really happens is that we grow around our grief. And I
Wow.
love that so much, that the big jar is you growing around your grief. And that just really, I haven't been able to get this out of my head, because the other thing, and maybe I'm just too literal, being, an English major and someone who loves to read and values a good metaphor, but it's the space in that larger jar, that the grief never goes away. The grief's always there. You've built up around it. that space in that jar, that's where the gratitude lives. That's where we hold space for others that are going through the same thing. That's where we can let our kindness live. Like the rest of that jar can be filled with so many things that can serve others and be helpful to others. It's like the grief itself never goes away. It's always there. It's what do we choose to grow around that grief?
Yes, because that's the thing, as everything, every emotion in our lives, every part of us, it's not about trying to rid yourself of it. It's not
No.
about, and I talk about this a bit, but I think something in the personal development self-help world is it makes it sound like we have to quote unquote fix ourselves and like rid ourselves of our fear of everything. And I'm like, but that's not, you can't, because that's a part of you. And to me, self-love is one of the top things that guide us to a life that we're proud of, where we're thriving and not surviving. And you have to learn to love the dark parts of you. You have
Oh
to
yeah.
learn to love like the parts that you don't like. I mean, it's not always comfortable when grief hits me and I'm talking to somebody or I'm in public or these very vulnerable things. And for a long time, even in those moments, I'm like, okay, shut it down. You're in public. You're not going to cry until you're somewhere private. But I've really started to, in my own journey of self-awareness, in my own journey of healing, I've learned to accept all these different parts of me. And the grief, accepting the grief was the first stepping stone to healing it and being like,
Mm.
okay, cool. And so I love that. I love that jar analogy. And I love exactly what you just said of the grief's there, but what else are you filling yourself with? Because here's the other thing. So I feel like most of the time we either shut the emotion down or we indulge in it. And this might be like a controversial thing to say, but our minds, especially in 2024, our mind loves to hold on to fear. Fear
Yep.
is what feeds our ego. We live in a world that breeds fear, and just choosing love takes discipline. It really does at first. And then it becomes a habit and a routine and a ceremony, as we discussed in our last podcast.
Thank you
Um,
for the callback.
yeah, that really affected me. That really affected me, that analogy. But so our mind is going to want to hold on to the drama. I noticed this when my grandparents died. I love how aware I've become. It kind of makes it a living hell sometimes in the best way. But my grandparents died, and then suddenly I was like, oh my gosh, like I want to tell people how dramatic this is. And I want to talk about like, indulge in the drama of it. Yes, there's absolutely talking it out. There's absolutely healing that. But this is also where mental discipline comes in. And this is also where choice comes in. If you make this loss your identity, if you wrap yourself up in it and you become the victim of it,
Mm.
you are keeping it alive in your body. And that becomes the jar instead of just the ball in the jar. And I know it's hard. Trust me, we do. We have this innate addiction to fear and to drama because there's something about stress that sometimes I feel gives us purpose. And so if that becomes our narrative, not in a way of your narrative, Ian, where it's like, bringing positivity and light to the world, not through like an avenue of speaking about it to inspire, but when it becomes your story, that this is who you are the victim of X, Y, and Z.
Yes. And you're wallowing
That's
there.
yes. And honestly, that not expressing the grief in a healthy way, but instead indulging and becoming addicted to it, that is what breeds depression.
Mm.
Also, that is what breeds so many, it becomes so much deeper. And then it's harder to pull away from that darkness. And so I think it's really important to remind people that it's like you have the power of how long you stay in that grief. You really do. It might sound weird to say that. It might sound almost cold, but you get to define how long that mourning process is.
Absolutely. Now, because forgive me, it was such a great conversation last time, but did we talk about the tattoo? No?
No.
Oh, okay.
Ooh.
Well, and it ties in nicely, but it's two-part story. One, this has been something that's been a part of my work in terms of me vocalizing this phrase on stage for probably 20 years now. I was back 20 years ago. I was out for a run back when my knees allowed me to still do that. I was out for a run and I happened to be running past, I believe it was a church. And just it was one of those ones that always put a quote or something up on their board. And this one said something like, pain will always happen. Misery is your decision.
Wow.
And it stopped me dead in my tracks. And I just kind of went, huh. And then I kept running and let that, noodle around in my brain for a little while and played with the cadence and the musicality of the phrase. But what it came to for me by the time I finished that run was pain is inevitable, misery is a choice.
Mm.
And that became a defining statement and something that I would share multiple times and still do share from the stage. And it's become this like mantra for my life. And then 2 weeks before my 50th birthday, a couple of years ago, middle of the pandemic, masked up and went to go see my tattoo artist friend who's done a number of pieces for me. And as a little 50th birthday present to myself, I, I'd always wanted that phrase tattooed somewhere. I didn't know how I wanted to do it. And I believe it was in a conversation with my partner. And I have this box in the closet in my office at home where my dad had given us, he had like all of our report cards and every newspaper clipping and every school photo and all of that. He said, I'm done carrying this crap or storing this crap for you guys. So many years ago, gave my brother and sister and I each our Rubbermaid tub with all of our stuff in it. In mine, I just happened to be going through looking for something else. In mine is my baby book. Like, Ian was born at this weight and all these things because mom was right handed. I'd never seen her handwriting, or I didn't think I had, or had any samples of her handwriting. And I went through this baby book. I immediately rushed it over to my dad and said, is this all, Mom, here? And he went, yep, that might be your grandmother. This is, yep. Kind of went through everything and scoured through all the words and had all the letters. So this on my forearm says pain is inevitable, misery is a choice in my mom's handwriting.
Wow.
And that was my 50th birthday present to myself because those words mean more to me and have been more healing to me and hopefully for many other people that I talk to. They're so important. And then just having it in mom's writing seemed very appropriate. And because just a long way of getting to what you were just saying that, yeah, the bad stuff's going to happen to all of us. It is inevitable. But that misery, that wallowing, that like, this is my identity being in this dark place, that's really a choice. And people choose to do that, and we can navigate ourselves out from it. So that's why those words and that tattoo have always been so important to me. And I still share those words from the stage. And they've become kind of ubiquitous with what I do, which is great. I will take that. And yeah, those words are, yeah, they're very important, but it speaks to exactly what you were just saying.
Do you still get waves of grief over your mom?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And they come, as I'm sure you will appreciate, weirdest places, weirdest
Yep.
times. Yeah, just like, wow, okay, that's gonna hit me. Like it'll be something in a movie. I still remember um I back in the 90s when Les Mis was in Toronto.
It's my
Lo-
favorite musical.
love Les Mis. Absolutely my favorite. And I think I saw the Toronto stage production 4 times, like the permanent stage production. And the woman that they had playing Fantine was wonderful and just a heartbreaking character. And you knowing the play will probably know the moment, but third act, right at the climax, Jean Valjean is just at the end of his life. And the way they staged it in Toronto was out of the darkness in a nightgown with shortly cut hair, which my mom had short, dirty blonde, brown hair. in this nightgown walking into the light. Fontaine comes out and sings, "Come to me where pain will never find you." And I fall to pieces every GD time. I'd be there with friends who's like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "Nope, really not." Like I would just fall to pieces when that part would happen because it would surprise me every time when she'd walk into that light, and it just got me. And sometimes it'll be something on a commercial, but yeah, I still get those waves for sure, for sure. And for various people that I've lost in my life, little things will sneak up, like friends that have passed or other relatives, and just something that'll just sneak up and suddenly poke me and kind of just really hit me for somebody that I've lost. And yeah, that stuff never goes away. I mean, I have so many people, especially when I'm at schools. Over the years, I'm fortunate to be able to have one-on-one conversations with people after I've done a motivational presentation, and I'll have a student come up and say, "Well, yeah, I've had so many people come up and say, oh, I lost my mom at the same age. I lost my mom at 10, at 11, or my mom's got a brain tumor right now. They've done the surgery and she's probably going to be okay. Or I lost my grandma. People always come up and want to talk about the loss. And the thing I always say is, first off, just so you know, spoiler alert, never goes away. It's always going to be there. It'll hit you at different times, but it's also a source of strength. It's
Mm.
what are you going to do with it? How are you going to use it? And how are you going to try and live your life to honor that person and be the version of yourself that they would most want you to be? And that's the thing I try and share in those one-on-one conversations. Like, again, do I wish that mom could have been here for, the last 43 years for a lot of things? Yeah, absolutely. But I know I wouldn't be the same person. Would not be the same person if I hadn't have gone through that. I mean, I would give anything for to sit across the table from her for a meal or just to have a conversation to get questions answered and talk about things. But I know that I can't. That's purely wishful thinking. And so I take the knowledge that I have, the things that I've learned, and the inspiration that I gained from the life that she chose to live. And that's the thing that I want to pass on to others.
I think that's so important. You worded it so beautifully of honor their death by being the person you want to be or that they wanted you to be or and that's what I mean too when I say like death is always such a beautiful gift to me because it recalibrates me. It gets me to
Sure.
reflect, to be like, "Hey, how am I showing up in the world?" And if it is taken away from me next week, how am I acting? And maybe this is egotistical, but I think a lot about like the legacy I'll leave behind,
Mm,
about I have so much I want to do in this life and an impact that I want to have that death for me always turns me inward, but then like puts a fire under my ass. It's like,
sure.
go get it. Go get it.
Well, and
Um,
you got to respect the fire and respect the journey you want to have, but also be able to find satisfaction and pride in where you are and what you're at. One of my dearest friends, who's also a speaker, I remember he and we always end up in these deep philosophical conversations. And this was several years ago. He asked me, just apropos of nothing, said, "Hey, I got a question for you. You open your eyes, bus coming right at you. It's over. What's the thought in your head?" And I went, "I did my best.
yeah.
I did my best and I'm good."
Yeah.
And that can be a powerful place to get to. Just to
100%.
have that satisfaction in like, yeah, if it all goes away, like I'm not like, yeah, there's things I want to do. There's obviously people I love that I want to have a lot of time with and everything else, but I'm also proud of where I'm at and I feel good about where I've been and the things that I've done and hopefully have left an impression behind.
Totally. And I think that's why it's so important to live. I mean, we could do a whole other episode on this one, but like to live in purpose of
Oh,
something,
yeah.
to like live your purpose on a day to day, because that is, and I think that's so vital to be like, hey, if it does go away tomorrow, like I'm good. That's such an
Well,
empowering thing.
if you ever do want to do one on purpose and you maybe want to bring in the new mutual friend that we have that I introduced you to, just I'd like to just sit in on that conversation maybe.
Yeah,
He's amazing.
absolutely.
purpose. And I love talking and thinking about all that kind of stuff too. Yeah, for sure.
Me too, me too. Okay, well let's start wrapping this up. Um any other points? Any other points that come to you if somebody right now was in the thick of it, or they're realizing that they haven't processed something? Any final closing thoughts on that?
If they're in the depth of the darkness right now, which I've been to, you've been to, and that's what we've been talking about for the past hour. But if you're in that darkness and you see or feel a hand reaching out to you, take it. If you see a light, follow it, and just know there is absolutely a light on the other side of this darkness. There always is. But if you see that hand reaching out to help you, no matter who that's from, if that's a friend or a family member or a professional, whatever, there is always somebody that wants to make sure you're going to be okay. Take that hand, reach up. If you know someone who is in that dark place, be the hand that is reaching back to pull them up. Be the light you can bring into their day, into that dark room, even if it's just for a minute. I mean, that's the thing with the work that I do. I know I'm not getting everybody to pick up everything I'm laying down when I get up on stage and put a mic in my hand. Some people are probably going to be in the depths of that darkness. My goal in those cases, and I don't know who those people are, is to just go, did I maybe do something on the lighter side that lifted them out of it for a moment? Maybe they had a bit of a chuckle. Maybe they laughed at something goofy that I did on stage. Or maybe they had an unconscious nod of recognition in knowing, yeah, I've been there. Just that moment can be a step in the right direction towards that light that's going to pull you out. So that would be the thing that I would say if there are people that are in the muck, which it is the muck, and if they are in the muck right now, just know that it can and it will get better. And I mean, like I've got right here, pain is inevitable, misery is a choice. And like with that jar analogy, that big dark ball of that grief is always going to be there. So what are you going to choose to grow around it?
Yeah, that's so beautiful. And just that, exactly how you just said it, you have power and you have the ability. Yeah. Oh, Ian, I love talking to you.
It's always a pleasure, Sarah.
So good. Thank you so much for sharing all that and your vulnerability and openness. Yeah, it's really beautiful.
Well, thank you. And I appreciate the conversation. It was great, as always.
Yeah,
Can't wait for the next one.
I know, right? You're just gonna be a regular. I like it. I'm down for it. Before we sign off, as always, I know we've done it before, but can you give me something you're grateful for? And can you give me something you're growing through?
I am grateful for it's when at the time we're recording here in Canada is Family Day weekend, and I've been grateful for as much as there's been snow and very very cold weather. I know you're in Florida, Sarah. Shut up! I don't want to hear about it. But it's been very cold and snowy. But I'm grateful for the time that I've had with people that I love very much, with my partner and her family, and I'm growing through, getting my calendar filled and just always trying to do that thing when you are an entrepreneur, you're running your own business, as you know, with being an actor, it's always looking for the next gig. What's going to be the next thing? And I'm grateful to be growing through all of that because that's always a journey. Sometimes it's work that the part of the job I like the least, but I'm growing through doing that and seeing what I can grow around the things that I have inside.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you so
Thank you.
much. And thank you everyone for listening to today's episode. I feel like it's a really special one. And again, for everybody going through it right now, just know that there will always be a light at the end of the tunnel. There really will be. Thank you so much. As always, stay grateful and keep growing. Thank you so much for tuning in today. If you liked what you heard, hit that subscribe button and maybe send it to someone who you think might need to hear today's message. And let me know how everything's sitting. Leave me a rating and a review and let me know what's resonating with you. What do you want to hear more of? What's your favorite episode and why? And I hope you find your way back here to another episode, another time, as we keep exploring this beautiful and wild thing that we all call life.